Hello, happy Monday, happy New Year. I want to show you how to include more veggies in your meals, so we're going to get started right away. Despite all your awful childhood memories of being forced to eat vegetables, please keep in mind that veggies do not have to be tasteless. They do not have to be bland and boring. They are colorful, they are beautiful, and they can totally spice up any meal. So here's a week's worth of meals full of vegetables. The first meal of the day. It is about 11 a.m. and I started with some sweet potatoes browning and just a little bit of avocado oil, and then I have this pre-cut veggie hash, which includes cauliflower, zucchini, bell pepper, corn, celery, and onion. So I'm going to add this to the sweet potato, and then I'm going to sprinkle some tofu scramble, and that'll be our first meal. The sweet potatoes are getting some color, and the reason that I want to cook the sweet potatoes first is so that we don't overcook the veggies. I've seasoned the veggies with some pink salt, Italian seasoning, and some ground black pepper. If your food starts to stick to the pan, go ahead and add just a little bit of water to it, but do not add any more oil. It's been about 5 minutes. This is looking great. You really don't want to overcook the veggies. I have already drained the tofu. If you're not familiar with tofu, it usually comes in a package of water, so I usually drain that out and then I squeeze the excess out with my hands before crumbling. So that is what we're going to do now. We're going to crumble the tofu into this. Now that I got the tofu crumbled in there, I'm going to just add a little bit of this black salt to the tofu. It'll give it some eggy flavor, and you really don't need a lot. I'll usually do a little bit now while I'm cooking it, and then when it's done, I'll finish with maybe about a pinch or two of the salt afterwards. It's looking great. So tofu really doesn't need to cook that long either. It just needs to be heated through. So I'll let this sit for about 5 minutes, and there it is. This will be enough for 2 adults, and this is going to be our first meal of the day. This was my first time ever trying this veggie hash mix, and I have to tell you, it was so satisfying. It was delicious, and I wish that I had more of it. I would eat this every single day for lunch if I could. I usually make sure to have some type of fruit in the morning, so I'll have that before eating a meal like this. And I know this seems like a lot of food, but this held us over until dinner time, and we are both working out. These meals are providing us with all the energy we need to get through the days. For dinner that night, I wanted to keep it pretty simple, so I decided to make a soup full of cabbage, carrots, celery, onion, peas, potatoes, and brown rice. I started by heating up the onion, celery, and carrots in some olive oil, and then I added in the potatoes. I seasoned with a little bit of Italian seasoning, salt, and pepper. And now I'm adding in 6 cups of water. I'm adding in about 2 tablespoons of this vegetable base, and I'm going to add in 1 cup of brown rice. Make sure to rinse it really well. It looks really soupy, but keep in mind the rice will absorb a lot of this liquid. I only used 1 of these cubes for this soup and it was enough. I love these cubes for soup, especially because they pack so much flavor and it cuts out needing to add any necessary seasoning afterwards. I'm going to add in my kale and cabbage. I made sure to rinse it off really well and dry it as much as I could. It does look like a lot, but it will cook down. You can see the soup getting extra thick here and looking so juicy and delicious. I let this simmer until all the rice was cooked through and the potatoes were fork tender. I topped the soup off with some avocado. This is optional, of course. And I can't ever in my life eat soup without some hot sauce, so you know that had to come through. The next day for our first meal, I made these sweet potatoes and tempeh. I started by steaming them with just a little bit of water on the bottom of the pan. In the meantime, I chopped up some mushroom, peppers, and onion. I sauteed the veggies in 1 tablespoon of avocado oil. I'm really making sure to use as little oil as possible. And then I added in the mushroom, and I'm also pan frying the tempeh with just a little bit of oil as well. I added some nutritional yeast to the bell peppers and some salt, pepper. Season this all to your liking. I also tossed the tempeh in a little bit of barbecue sauce before serving. I topped the potatoes with some salsa, avocado, and some vegan feta cheese. And then I steamed some broccoli on the side and added no additional seasoning to the broccoli. That night we had leftover cabbage soup for dinner. So for Wednesday, our first meal, I started by heating up this spicy Mexican style cauliflower rice, and then I chopped up 4 bell peppers and half a zucchini. I added in some canned black beans, and then I tossed in all the veggies. Of course, I had to end with a huge handful of spinach, turn the heat down and let that heat through. And there you have it. And instead of topping this with some avocado, I decided to just make some avocado toast on the side with some vegan cream cheese and everything but the bagel seasoning. This was a plate full of veggies and it was so good. This is another thing I could eat every day. So I didn't really get to record much of the process of this meal, but I had to include it because this was our dinner that night and it was so good. Oh my gosh. You gotta check out my TikTok for that eggplant recipe. You will not be disappointed. So the next day, our first meal, I was running a bit late and it was already getting later in the day, so I had to hurry up, think fast. I took this frozen bag of rice and these frozen peas. I threw it all together with half a can of corn and we called it a day. I'm really trying to get away from eating packaged or processed foods, but they do help so much when you're cooking at home and you just really don't have a lot of time to come up with something from scratch. I do make sure to get things that have very little ingredients and I understand all that is in the packaging. This rice is so good. I highly recommend it if you haven't tried it before. It's from Trader Joe's and I think it'll be good with any type of vegetables you want to add to it. Oh yeah, and we had some steamed edamame on the side, which was just such a perfect little snack. On Friday morning, I brought the potatoes back and I made a delicious baked hash. So good, and you gotta try this. It's perfect even for the weekend. It's so good. So I started off by cutting half a sweet potato, and I think I used 4 of the smaller golden potatoes. And you want to cut them in pretty big chunks because you are going to boil them a little bit and put them in the oven, so you want to make sure they hold up. So this is after I steamed them for about 5 minutes. You don't want them too tender. And then I seasoned with all of this good stuff here, and then I added in chunks of onion, garlic, and bell peppers. I popped this in the oven at 375 degrees for about 30 minutes. And while that was baking, I started on my tofu scramble. I had jalapenos and tomatoes sauteing in a little bit of olive oil. And then I added in my tofu, let it fry until it was a little golden brown. And then I added in my favorite tofu scramble. I don't even know what it is. It's this liquid gold, and it was inspired by Rainbow Plant Life. You gotta check out her tofu scramble. It was the bomb. And that's that for our first meal of the day. Later that night, I made some spaghetti squash, and I used this vegan bolognese sauce from Trader Joe's with plant-based meat in it. Start off by washing the spaghetti squash and then cutting it in half to remove all the seeds and core. And then you are going to season it to your liking. I added some sage leaves to it because I needed to use them and just to add a little bit of flavor. And this is what I seasoned my spaghetti squash with, along with some salt and cracked black pepper. I oiled the bottom of the baking pan, and then I placed them face down in a 400-degree oven for 45 minutes. I cut the mushroom into big chunks to give the sauce some texture, and then I'm going to saute this with the onion and green pepper. Once the veggies began to cook down, I poured in all the sauce, and then I let this simmer until it thickened. My favorite way to cook Brussels sprouts is to let them steam in the microwave for a couple of minutes before cutting them in half. And then I like to pan fry them or saute them on the stove with a little bit of olive oil. You can season to your liking, and then I add a little bit of balsamic vinegar to finish. My spaghetti squash are fresh out the oven, looking great. Brussels sprouts are finished, the sauce is done, and of course I had to add in a handful of greens. Let that all cook down. And then assemble your spaghetti squash. So you start by scraping the squash to get this spaghetti-like texture. And then I poured the sauce into the spaghetti squash. I topped it with some basil and vegan feta cheese, and then I had the Brussels sprouts on the side. And of course you can enjoy it with a piece of garlic toast to complete the meal. On the weekend, I tried to keep things pretty simple, but we started with our first meal of the day. Half of this eggplant was cut into these pieces, and I started cooking it with some of these cherry tomatoes. I seasoned with some curry powder and cumin. I added in some crumbled tofu, seasoned with some cracked black pepper and this Indian black salt. And then I made a wrap out of the leftover pita from having Greek food earlier that week. I topped it with some fresh tomatoes, fresh red onion, some vegan feta cheese, and a handful of spinach. This was a pretty big wrap. It was stuffed until I couldn't stuff it anymore, and it was very satisfying. Held us over until dinner. And for dinner, this lasted us 2 nights. I love making this. It's just a little lentil kind of curry thing. I don't want to call it curry, but I like adding in sweet potatoes, onion, lentils, curry paste, tomato paste, any seasonings that you love. I like to serve it with some brown rice. I pour in some veggie broth to bring it all together. And I usually add in a can of coconut milk or coconut cream as well, but I wanted to keep this low fat, so I only added in a little bit of soy milk to it, and then I finished it with some cauliflower, broccoli, and peas. Once those all cooked down and were tender, it was ready to serve. You can already tell this is a very filling meal, and it does last. If you're cooking for 1 or 2 people, you will definitely have this for at least a couple of nights. So there is a week's worth of veggie-filled meals. I hope this inspires you to eat more vegetables, and let me know if you want more videos like this in the future. Take care.